I just wanted to start the process with part of a lot of what we did in the last several years. This is the fourth report that we put out with regards to the Latino electorate in Georgia. During presidential cycles in particular, we've done a surname match of the entire statewide database from the Secretary of State's office. And the reason we do that is because what we have found is, depending on the election cycle, the Latino electorate, part of the Latino electorate is missed if you only look at the self-identification process that the Secretary of State process has, because it's a binary system. And of course, Latinos are of many races, and there's many other factors that the report goes into. But a surname match is the national standard in which the NALEO Educational Fund that helped us do the surname match. Some states don't have racial ethnic background collected with voter registration data, so they do the surname match in order to determine the Latino electorate. When there is racial and ethnic data part of the process, that is included with the surname match. But then also, as we found in Georgia, particularly this year, without the surname match, Georgia would miss about 25% of the Latino electorate, which is a significant chunk of the electorate. So we want to make sure that we have a holistic view of the Latino electorate, and that is why we've been doing this study every 4 years, to get a complete picture of the Latino electorate, not just a smaller picture that you would have if you relied only on Secretary of State's data. So next slide, Derek.
So here we have the statewide election and how did the Hispanics, and the Latino community behaved during this election. And as we see, we have a 57.7 growth on the total Hispanic growth that registered in 2020 compared to 2016. And that's when we compared also to 2016, we see a 57.8 growth of the total Hispanic that voted in 2020 compared to 2016. And the turnout rate for the entire election was 3.3%, and Hispanics made 4.1% of the total turnout in the statewide election.
Yeah, if I can point out, I mean, again, that's about 60% growth in the number of registered voters, as well as those that actually voted in the 2020 election as compared to the 2016 election. As we know, the 2020 election had very tight margins. So this growth in the Latino electorate really had a powerful effect on the outcome of the elections here in Georgia. And in this slide, we wanted to do a historical comparison of the growth of the Latino electorate for the years that we have done this complete study of the Latino electorate in Georgia. As you can see, compared to 2008 to 2020, the Latino electorate has really grown tremendously. And that just in a very short amount of time, the Latino community has become a powerhouse for the state of Georgia, particularly as the state of Georgia has gotten more competitive. The Latino vote has gotten more powerful. So that's the important takeaway that we have right now, is that right now the Latino vote is extremely powerful in the state of Georgia in determining the outcome of statewide competitive races and moving forward as well for future elections. So we can see the growth rate here, and certainly we're going to expect the growth rate to continue to grow as we continue to do our work in Georgia.
Here we have the age of the Georgia Latino electorate, and as we can see, most of the electorate is under 40 years old. And here we also have the turnouts with 18 to 24 with 4.5%, 25 to 39 years old, we have 6.2%, with 40 to 60, we have 2.9%, and with over 61, we have 5.5%.
And if I could add for that, those numbers bear out to what we see nationally for different voting rates of different age groups. So the Latino community is actually really, I think, represents. Certainly, there's a lot more work to do with those under 40, and certainly that's where we focus a lot of our efforts, is making sure that we can drive voter participation in the under 40 Latino electorate. And for the gender breakdown, of course, we see that Latinas in Georgia continue to lead, both in the number of registered voters, as well as in the percentage of voter participation for our state. So again, in 2016, Latinas made significant record-breaking numbers in turnout. And in 2020, we continue to see the trend of high Latina voter participation rate. And what we're proud of, actually, is that even though Latinas did outperform Latinos, but in 2020 we saw more Latinos also going out to vote as compared to 2016. So there was a significant jump in Latinos voting, and Latinas continue to perform and are carrying the weight of our community. So Latinas are leading with the powerhouse of the Latino vote is within the Latina community.
That's right. Here we have a comparison between 2020 and 2016. And as Jerry was saying, in 2016, there was a very big difference from female participation in the Latina community. And this year, like Jerry said, it had an incredible growth and outpaced the male counterpart voters. There was a 26.19 growth in the male Hispanic that registered, and a 98.29 growth in the female Hispanic that registered in 2020 compared to 2016. Sorry.
So in this analysis, we looked at the top 10 counties with the highest density of Latino registered voters. And of course, when we looked at the turnout rate for each of those counties as well. So as you can see here, the top 10 counties really have a large percentage of the total Latino electorate in the state of Georgia. So these top 10 counties represent a large majority of the Latino electorate in Georgia. Gwinnett County leads with over 71,000 Latino registered voters with a 56% turnout rate. So all of these counties also saw a growth in the votes cast by Latinos of over 50%, with the exception of Cobb County that was just shy of that 50% mark. So the growth is astounding for each of these 10 counties, but also voter participation was really high in many of these counties as well. So in some instances, it was extremely high. For example, in Forsyth County, voter participation rates was 65.2%, which in Forsyth County, that matched the statewide voter participation rate of 65%. So that significant performance of the Latino community in many of these counties, and the national Latino voter participation rate was about 54%. So many of these top counties also outperform the national Latino voter participation rate. So all of this information that we have it in each county that we have. So there's more information posted in our report. If one of the counties that you're particularly interested in isn't indicated here, we do have that analysis provided in the report.
That's correct. And we do have this chart to showcase the growth of the top 10 counties of Latino registered voters, with Gwinnett, Cobb, and Fulton doing an amazing evolution from previous years. As you can tell, Gwinnett County almost tripled from 2008, and then we have the Cobb and Hull also having almost doubled their past registers. And as you can see, the growth of the Latino community in these counties, it's very impressive.
So for the January runoff, a lot has been said as well. And I think the Latino community also demonstrated significant power for the January runoff in the state of Georgia. So we had a 42% voter turnout in the January runoff, which is extremely a significant increase from the previous time that we did have a January runoff. The previous time that we had a January runoff, I think the total number of voters was probably 2.2 million, Eric, if I remember that number correctly. That was total turnout. So the fact that we had a significant number of Latinos returning to vote in the January runoff, again, the statewide competitive races that we saw in the January runoff schedule, they were tight, and certainly the number of Latinos that voted had a significant impact in the outcome of those elections as well.
And that's our highlights of the 2020 Georgia Hispanic turnout. And now we are going to provide a space for questions. Please write your questions in the chat box so we can control the unmuting and muting. And we know that that's something sometimes a little bit complicated. So please drop the questions in the chat, and Jerry will be answering them.
So someone from Telemundo is asking, could you please explain in Spanish?
En español, sí, claro que sí. ¿Qué específicamente desea que expliquemos? ¿Algún slide en específico? ¿Algún tema en específico? ¿O el proceso de name match en español?
Yo puedo hacer unos comentarios en general sobre el reporte que hicimos. Pues lo que vemos en el reporte es que el voto latino continúa a crecer y manifestar bastante poder en la comunidad, y los políticos en Georgia deben de poner atención sobre el crecimiento y el poder de la comunidad latina. El electorado ha crecido bastante en los varios años que hemos estudiado el electorado de los latinos, de la comunidad latina, y también participaron en números, en bastantes números en las elecciones de 2020, hasta también en la elección que ocurrió en enero. La comunidad latina tuvo un gran impacto en cómo salieron las elecciones, y debemos de tener bastante éxito sobre la participación de nuestra comunidad, pero todavía tenemos trabajo que hacer en varios condados y también con varias demografía de nuestra comunidad para asegurar que más latinos participen en el proceso de votar. ¿Otras preguntas? Other questions?
Hey, Jerry, it's Ivan. I'm just going to throw out a question if that's okay.
Go ahead, Ivan.
What type of trajectory essentially do you see happening? I mean, we're saying that there's a 50% growth in Hispanic voter turnout, which is pretty amazing. Where is this going? I mean, it looked with only, I think you showed 4% of the Hispanic population voted. 4% of the Georgia population that were Hispanic voted, if I'm correct. And we're what, over 18 years old? We're maybe 10%?
Yes, so let me talk about, and maybe we can go back to that chart. I think it's the first chart that we're talking about, Eric. Ivan, I'll answer that question. Based on the total number of votes that were cast in the 2020 election in November, the Latino community made up 4% of the total turnout of the statewide election. So that means that out of the 4.8 million votes that were 4.8 million, well, 5 million votes that were cast in the November election, 205,000 of those were Latino, which is about 4.1% of the total electorate that showed up to vote in Georgia. And as far as the growth that we've seen, really, it really is astounding growth that we've seen for the Latino community. It's estimated that there's still probably about 88,000 Latinos that are eligible, not yet registered in the state of Georgia. So that growth really is can continue to grow in the next couple of election cycles. So as Georgia becomes more competitive, the Latino community and the Latino electorate in particular is going to be the demographic to court to make sure that for voter participation and voter engagement, to make sure that politicians and parties are going to be paying attention to the Latino vote, because it is a powerhouse that needs to be courted. I'm going to be reading some questions that we have that are in the chat. LCF Georgia wants to know if the data will be available in the report. Yes, absolutely. Full data and analysis is in the report, and we do have several appendix sections where there is data for the entirety of the state. We broke it down by counties, legislative districts, congressional districts, and top 10 counties in growth. So there is a lot of data there for analysis. So that is there. Okay, and the question from Telemundo, I'm going to respond to it in Spanish. So la pregunta de Telemundo Atlanta es que el impacto de la comunidad latina en la próxima elección para gobernador. La comunidad latina va a tener una posición de poder en la elección para gobernador en 2022. El poder de la comunidad latina está creciendo y va a continuar a crecer para 2022, y los políticos deben de poner atención a la comunidad latina y asegurar que los temas que tocan ellos están a favor de nuestra comunidad y también a favor de la comunidad latina. Eso es algo muy importante para las elecciones de gobernador. And then next question is, could you tell the impact of millennials and Gen Z voting and why they were participating in the last presidential election in Spanish? Sí, la comunidad y los jóvenes también participaron en bastantes números y aumentaron los números de los jóvenes también que participaron en las elecciones, pero desafortunadamente el porcentaje de participación de los jóvenes todavía falta para mejorarse. Esos son los esfuerzos que muchas de las comunidades, muchas de las organizaciones que están haciendo este trabajo en la comunidad se enfocan en asegurar que la comunidad joven salga para votar en cada elección, porque es importante. Los jóvenes tienen bastante poder en las elecciones, como vemos en los números aquí, en los números que están registrados, pero necesitan que ejercer el poder y actualmente salir para votar. En eso vamos a estar enfocando muchos de nuestros esfuerzos, es para enfocar en la comunidad joven, para asegurar que ellos también salgan no solamente se registren para votar, pero que salgan para votar también. So the question with regards to the what counties the eligible voters are in, no, this report only analyzed those that are registered to vote as of for the November elections as well as the January runoff elections. So those that are eligible voters, that's an estimate that has come out, and I think the Pew Hispanic Center puts out some of those estimates. They don't break it down by county, just looking at the total population. After we have census numbers come out towards the fall of this year, I think we're going to get a better assessment of the total number of eligible Latinos that are not yet registered as well. So thank you for that question, Jennifer. Any other questions that we haven't answered at this point?
Jerry, do you have any data that would show that all the dollars that came into our state actually affected or helped or increased the Hispanic vote for the runoff?
Well, I could speak to the impact that we had with regards to the efforts that we did. What we have seen in time after time in studies that have been done is that when we do the year-round voter engagement process that we do at GALEO and many other organizations that do this work as well, we see voter participation rates increasing from 3% to 10% more than an area that we don't do this type of work in. So the more that we're able to do more canvassing, more phone banking, more text banking, more mailers, that requires resources for us to be able to do that. And the more resources that we have to do more of that, the greater impact that it had. So this past year posed a significant challenge to many of the groups that were doing this type of work out in our communities, particularly because of the pandemic. And really the mobility of our community, because many people with unstable housing and people moving based on whether they were working or not, that posed a lot of challenges for our community. So despite all of those obstacles for participating in the election, the performance that we saw and the outcome that we saw in voter participation was astounding. More needs to be done. There was not enough done with regards to outreach from either campaigns or politicians with regards to the Latino community. And I think that's going to be a focus that needs to happen to make sure that, yes, we were engaging folks to come out and vote, but the next question is, who should they vote for? And really, I think that that's where there's a great need for more investment of resources, not secondary resources or last minute resources as an afterthought, but really as a part of a strategic outreach effort for any election and elected officials and politicians that are running in the future. They need to look at the Latino community as a targeted demographic that needs to be part of their strategic outreach and not an afterthought. And that's part of the challenge that we have in Georgia, is that we need to make sure that that moves forward. Is the Latino community is powerful and needs to be courted, and more investment and resources need to happen for that to truly realize its full potential.
Thank you, for sure.
Any questions that we have?
Another question was, will the report include what counties these eligible voters are?
Yes, I answered that question. That's an estimate that's generated by the Pew. And once we get census numbers out, we will probably get an update on the total number of eligible voters estimated in Georgia, but it doesn't break it down by counties, unfortunately. But the one thing that I'll say associated with that is we know where our communities are. Where our communities are more numerous, that's where our communities that are more numerous and eligible voters, where we need to target also in making sure that eligible voters are registered to vote in that process too. Hearing no other questions, I just want to thank you all for joining us today. So this is something that we've been doing every 4 years with a presidential cycle. This year in particular, we saw a record-breaking turnout and record-breaking participation of the Latino community. So we wanted to make sure that we got this out as soon as possible. I want to thank Eric Medina for coming on board quickly and helping in the writing of the report. And the analysis. The report will be available on our website. The full report will be available on our website. There's a lot of data in the report, and if there's other data that's needed, certainly reach out to us, and we can help facilitate the data and the analysis that we did in that process. So thank you all for joining us. We certainly appreciate it, and just remember, the Georgia Latino Vote continues to grow in power and strength and influence, and will continue to make its mark in Georgia's elections. Thank you so much.